Welcome back to the channel. As part of a triple upload today, this will be my team selection for Matchday 12 in UCL Fantasy. The best wildcard squad was published earlier. The same goes for the transfer tips for FPL. And on Friday, I uploaded a best limitless team, but because of the updates and injuries over the weekend, I provided an updated version in my wildcard video. And the deadline stream tomorrow will conclude very extensive coverage for UCL Fantasy. We had so many injury updates on Monday morning, and all of them will be covered in today's podcast. And if anything escapes me, at least for Monday night and Tuesday morning, because it's impossible to cover those because they will happen in the future, they will be addressed in my deadline stream. So be sure not to miss it by liking this video, subscribing to the channel, and hitting the notification bell so you don't miss a single upload or live stream for both FPL and UCL Fantasy. There's a lot more content headed your way, like the best free hit team for blank gimmick 29, a wildcard squad, my own team selection, and another deadline stream this weekend. So stay tuned for all of that, and it'd be great to have you on board. Check out the links in the description below for my X, Instagram, and Blue Sky, the Discord server, UCL Fantasy League, which you can see on screen, as well as Spotify. Without further ado, let's jump straight into it. There's a rapid turnaround between deadlines, as we had Champions League matches only last week, and another UCL Fantasy deadline is on the horizon. But for match day 11 in the first leg of the round of 16, I had the best goalkeeper in Alisson Becker, who had very low ownership. He won player of the match in that 1-0 victory in Paris, and Paris Saint-Germain really dominated that game. They should have won it, but with some wasteful finishing and some top saves by Alisson, Liverpool were able to snatch that victory, and now they hold a massive advantage going into Anfield, where they're massive favourites to progress to the next round. But PSG had won 10 consecutive games before their loss against Liverpool, and they were undefeated since late November. Now their away record still remains intact with 10 consecutive wins on their travels, but that'll be a tough ask to kind of break that at Anfield and to keep it going essentially. So we'll see how they end up going, but I think Alisson is a solid keeper for the long term. He is quite expensive, and before match day 11 he wasn't the greatest in terms of UCL fantasy points, but I actually owned him earlier this season when Liverpool played Girona towards the end of the league phase, and he did very well for me there and was unlucky not to win player of the match in that 1-0 victory. But apart from that, I think Alisson's been kind of hit or miss, especially with the injuries he suffered towards the beginning of this campaign. As for my defensive line, it was fairly decent actually, and it was those Inter Milan defenders that really came up clutch for me, with Dumfries and De Vrij getting 7 points each. But Denzel Dumfries is 1 yellow card away from suspension, and De Vrij didn't take part in full training on Monday morning. The same goes for Lautaro Martinez due to fatigue. So these players could be rested, and that's another headache for me in terms of my transfer plans. As for Gabriel, he didn't keep a clean sheet after Thomas Partey made a completely unnecessary challenge to give PSV a penalty in that 7-1 victory for Arsenal. So that was quite frustrating. But the likes of Gabriel and Saliba still got some decent returns through the ball recoveries. Saliba got 5 points overall and Gabriel with 4. But it was Jurriën Timber who opened the scoring. He was the standout in that Gunners defensive line, and David Raya between the sticks was the only one to essentially blank. Calafiori off the bench got a goal and an assist. I think that's the first time a defender's done that off the bench in a Champions League game since 2004, so that's very impressive. But I think in terms of his defending skills, Calafiori does leave a lot to be desired, and Arsenal could rotate quite heavily on Wednesday night. As for Grimaldo, I wouldn't share the same concerns in terms of his minutes. Grimaldo was a substitute in that 2-0 loss against Werder Bremen on Saturday, and he replaced the injured Florian Wirtz actually, and he's going to be out for the next couple of weeks. That has been confirmed by Bayer Leverkusen, which I'll talk about in the injury section and fixtures towards the end of this podcast. But this defensive line was still fairly underwhelming, with Gabriel and Grimaldo blanking. Schlotterbeck on my bench got 4 points, despite Lille getting a 1-1 draw at the Signal Iduna Park, and it was really those Inter Milan defenders and Alisson in goal that carried my defensive line. With the midfield, it was somewhat of a similar story. There were a few players who really stepped up, and others were a huge disappointment. So Rafinha, as my captain, got the goal, and he didn't win player of the match this time. It was Pedri, and I have to say, Szczesny was very hard done by. He easily could have won that with some top saves against Benfica. Mohamed Salah blanked and played very poorly against PSG, but scored a brace of penalties against Southampton, and a lot of us would have captained him in FPL. Elise got an assist, but it was Harry Kane getting 15 points against Leverkusen, and Musiala scored, so he was a bit underwhelming compared to those. and it was really Adeyemi who stepped up for me as a differential with 9 points, and he was close to winning player of the match in that 1-1 draw against Lille. And Florian Wirtz blanked. I wasn't too sure about this particular pick because as good as Wirtz has been this season, his record against Bayern Munich is terrible, with 1 goal and 1 assist in 12 matches against the Bavarians for his entire career. And there are heavy links where Wirtz could actually go to Bayern Munich in the summer, so that was always going to be a bit problematic with a lot of noise heading into the first leg. But with that injury, which could rule him out for the next couple of weeks, possibly for over a month, that will be a massive blow to Bayer Leverkusen, who failed to capitalise on Bayern Munich's defeat against Bochum this weekend, and in the Champions League, their hopes are hanging by a thread. With the forward line though, it was pretty disappointing, and to be honest, it's the worst position of them all. I had 3 top options on paper in Lewandowski, Mbappe, and Guirassy, and they all blanked. It was Lautaro Martinez, Julian Alvarez, and these other options who really stepped up and delivered for those that invested in those differentials, and even the likes of Vinicius Jr. were very disappointing. It was Rodrigo who stepped up for Real Madrid this time round, but I would expect a change in the formula and also in the circumstances for the second leg. I think some of these forwards that I have could do very well, but it's a question of keeping the right ones and not offloading at the wrong time, because that can easily happen in UCL Fantasy with a plethora of options at our disposal. But it was Harry Kane who stole the show in that forward line with a goal from a penalty and a brace overall to get those 15 points. And his record against Bayer Leverkusen isn't particularly great overall, but he somewhat rectified that in the first leg of the round of 16. With my bench, I had the likes of Kobel, Mbappe, Guirassy and Schlotterbeck, so only one of them did fairly well in the German centre-back, and he's actually quite doubtful for me going into the second leg because that double-up in the Borussia Dortmund defence doesn't look good whatsoever away from home, and I think trimming that down to 1 is probably ideal. But I have to say, in the last couple of games away from home, Borussia Dortmund have been stronger there compared to the home matches, so that could be something worth considering, and maybe I'll just end up sticking with Kobel and Schlotterbeck in the end. Nothing is finalised for me, but with the rankings and my matchday points, it wasn't too great, but enough for a green arrow, so I'm now where I was around matchday 9 before the knockout playoff rounds even began. I got 72 points, and the green arrow is mainly thanks to Alisson, a double up in the Inter Milan defence, and Adeyemi, because Rafinha is fairly template. The 3 forwards were a massive letdown. Even Salah and Wirtz were also quite underwhelming, and I expected a little bit more from my 15-man squad. I think there were some good picks, maybe 1 or 2 of them were slightly questionable, like Florian Wirtz, but I think it's a bit unfortunate for him to pick up the injury, and now we need to find the best replacements for him, which I'll discuss in this video and also in this transfer section right now. But before I do that, let's talk about other goalkeepers and positions to really rectify. I think if I were to sell Kobel, it would be to David Raya. I think in isolation, Szczesny will be the best long-term pick between the sticks, but if I were to do that, he plays on the same day as Alisson, and that means for matchday 12, I would have to bench one of them, and that doesn't make too much sense in my opinion. I'd rather have a Tuesday and Wednesday goalkeeper, and when the time comes for the quarterfinals or semi-finals, I can then rectify that sort of thing. And the alternative, you could say, is to maybe stick with Kobel and sell Alisson to Szczesny and do something like that, but then you could see Dortmund and Barcelona facing each other in the next round, or Kobel will be eliminated anyway, so that's something else you need to weigh up. But as long as you've got 2 goalkeepers who don't clash until the semi-finals, I think you're all set in that position, and ideally you wouldn't make transfers in this position and instead focus on the higher scoring areas. Even the defenders would definitely have a higher ceiling, but more so the midfield and forward line, that's where the bulk of the points and the double-digit hauls will come from. But let's still talk about some defender transfers I could make, and one of them is Schlotterbeck to Jules Koundé. Not having any Barcelona defensive coverage might be a bit of a mistake from my part. I know they haven't been great all season at the back, but they have shown improvements recently and have kept a few clean sheets here and there, which included the first leg against Benfica. They went down to 10 men with Pau Cubarsí getting a red card for a professional last man foul, and they still managed to hang on. Rafinha scored the winning goal, and the likes of Koundé got 8 points in the first leg through ball recoveries. Szczesny made so many saves and should have won player of the match, in my opinion. And you've got the likes of Inigo Martinez, who is a suspension risk, but he's yet another good option in that Catalan's defence. When I look at Borussia Dortmund defensively though, I'd rather have Schlotterbeck than Kobel, so I don't see myself selling both of them simultaneously, even though that could be the best thing to do for matchday 12 and beyond. I think selling one is probably the best thing in my situation, and at the moment I would lean towards selling Kobel and keeping Schlotterbeck. But as I mentioned earlier in this video, there is the possibility that De Vrij could be benched, and that could mean he will be sold instead of Grimaldo and Schlotterbeck, at least for the time being. And if Borussia Dortmund and Bayer Leverkusen are eliminated heading into the quarterfinals, they can also be sold just before matchday 13 as well. And I've got the wildcard in my back pocket. I used the Limitless very early on in the campaign, I believe in matchday 3, and you get 5 free transfers for the first leg anyway, so I think it's quite easy to navigate this period regardless. But what the wildcard allows me to do at this stage of the competition is just hone in on what's right in front of me and go for more aggressive picks, and that's why keeping Grimaldo now and hoping for a Leverkusen clean sheet where Bayern Munich might just go into that game defending their 3-0 lead, that could be a very good play, which a lot of people don't go for. But Saliba is still a top option in that defensive line to replace the likes of Grimaldo, Schlotterbeck, or De Vrij, who could be on the chopping block for me right now. But these were my original plans, to sell one of Grimaldo or Schlotterbeck and really reinvigorate that defensive line. But now it looks like De Vrij might be the one to get rid of. But I think the most important and also interesting picks will be those Wirtz replacements. Now, a lot of people might argue Martin Odegaard isn't going to start. I mean, Arsenal won 7-1 and they could rotate and just play three midfielders like Jorginho, Partey and go for Nwaneri there. But my argument is Arsenal don't have that many options in the forward line, despite the fact that Martinelli returned from injury and made a cameo against Man United on Sunday. But generally speaking, if Nwaneri was to come in and be the creative midfielder in Odegaard's absence, then who plays on the right wing? Now it could be Martinelli, but he can't play 90 minutes just yet. He needs to be eased back into things. And I also think Arsenal don't have any other options in that midfield. Otherwise, they'll essentially play 2 or 3 defensive midfielders and maybe put Merino, from that striker position into the midfield, or go for Rice, Partey and Jorginho. I mean, that could work in a game like this where they're 7-1 up, but I just don't see Odegaard being benched personally. Maybe I'm wrong about that. And if we get any inklings which say otherwise in the deadline stream, I'll let you know, of course. But Odegaard is still one of the top recommendations and replacements for Wirtz, mainly for matchday 12. This wouldn't be a long-term pick, and he has scored against PSV at home only last season in Arsenal's first game back in the Champions League in a 4-0 win for the Gunners. Odegaard did very well in that game, and he's got a good record against PSV overall, which only got better after that 7-1 win in the first leg. A more secure option in that midfield, who's also even cheaper, would be Morgan Rogers, and that could be a great Florian Wirtz replacement. It gives you an Aston Villa attacker, which a lot of people won't have, and his ownership remains very low. He won player of the match in the first leg and got that assist, which forced the own goal. And Marco Asensio is the inform midfielder, so to speak, but he missed the Brentford game, and that could be a slight concern there. The same goes for the goalkeeper, Emi Martinez. So I think Rodgers is just kind of nailed on to start most games for Aston Villa, and he only costs 5 million in UCL Fantasy. He also happened to score a hat-trick in matchday 8 against Celtic, so he's got decent pedigree in this competition, and he could improve this for the second leg against Club Brugge. But next up is going to be another rotation risk, you could say. Hakan Çalhanoğlu made his return over the weekend in a 3-2 win over Monza, and he won player of the match, scored in that game, and he's the main penalty taker. He is probably my favourite Wirtz replacement, but it's worth mentioning that there are some conflicting reports. Some sources indicate that Çalhanoğlu will start, whilst others think he'll be on the bench. It's worth noting that Sky Sports Italia is the one to really look out for, and if they have Çalhanoğlu in their starting 11 tomorrow, and hopefully we get that news before the deadline stream, then he'll be my Wirtz replacement. Otherwise, I'll be looking at Odegaard, Rodgers, or perhaps in a different direction, maybe go for Musiala and go really offensive with the likes of Bayern Munich, for example. So that's something I need to weigh up from now until the deadline. But in the forward position, I was actually looking at Lautaro Martinez as my Guirassy replacement, and perhaps even Kylian Mbappe, but now it could be Taremi instead, as Lautaro Martinez will likely be benched, and we'll see a front line of Thuram and Taremi. And just going for that massive differential and a 1-week punt is going to be a perfect suit for my chip strategy, where I've got the wild card in my back pocket. So Taremi is in for one match day only, then I get rid of him for match day 13 by using the wild card chip, or maybe with 5 free transfers and saving the wild card for later in the season. So there's a lot to discuss, many injury updates to look out for, but having all of that considered, this is how my team would line up for matchday 12 for the second leg, assuming I make the following transfers. But Alisson in goal, there is no reason to change this whatsoever. He is facing PSG at home. It's not the easiest of opponents. They've been in great form and they were able to rest 8 key players who started against Liverpool in the first leg. A lot of them came off the bench, like Ousmane Dembele. He scored a brace. Whilst Liverpool struggled at first against Southampton, who are bottom of the Premier League table, they went 1-0 down after a miscommunication between Virgil van Dijk and Alisson Becker. But they won 3-1 in the end. There was no doubt about the result, even though they had that slight wobble at the beginning. And Alisson is one of the best goalkeepers for the long term. As for my defenders, there are some slight concerns, as I mentioned, and the right might have to be sold. If that's the case, I will go to Jules Koundé and go for a Barcelona defender. And you could argue, why not go for another Inter Milan defender to replace him and go for Bissek or one of those defenders who might start the game? That is definitely a consideration for me, and I think it's very important to have that Sky Sports Italia lineup during the deadline stream just before we have that lock and we can't make any changes to our teams. And that's where I could maybe go all in on Inter Milan again with a defensive double up at the very least. Otherwise, the safest option for me is to go for Jules Koundé and diversify my defensive line facing Benfica at home. He got that clean sheet and an 8-pointer in the reverse fixture, so I could see him doing fairly well once again. And as I mentioned in my best team / best wildcard squad only a few hours ago, Barcelona's game over the weekend was postponed due to the death of their club doctor, so they had a full rest over the last couple of days, and they will have that slight advantage over Benfica, who won 3-0 against Nacional, but Barcelona would be favourites anyway, irrespective of the difference in terms of breaks and stuff like that. Denzel Dumfries remains in my team, and all of the lineups I've seen have the Dutchman in that lineup, despite the fact that Carlos Augusto made a return against Monza as a substitute. That shouldn't impact Dumfries' minutes too much, and the main rotation will happen in the centre-back positions, as Inter Milan have so many options in that particular area. And Grimaldo facing Bayern Munich at home, it's not the best of fixtures, and that 3-0 loss was quite surprising, but I think Grimaldo can still do very well in this second leg and get something, whether it's a goal, assist or clean sheet, and he has done it before against Bayern Munich. With the midfield, it looks fairly solid on paper, with Rafinha, Salah, Elise and Çalhanoğlu if he's in that lineup by Sky Sports Italia. Otherwise, I'll need to reconsider that, as I mentioned earlier, but those three in particular, Rafinha, Salah and Elise, are nailed on in that midfield unless we get any news tomorrow that something isn't quite right with them. But Rafinha for me is a standout captaincy option on the Tuesday. Even Salah is up there, but he might be slightly lower down in the pecking order. That's not something I usually say in FPL. He's always the go-to captain there. But in UCL Fantasy, you can go against him. He hasn't been the best in this competition, though. I think Rafinha, when you're kind of comparing their Ballon d'Or rankings and their quest for the trophy and the award, I think Rafinha has been much better in the Champions League so far, which gives him an edge, but both players will undoubtedly be in the top 2 over everybody else. With the forward line, though, I'm expecting much better this time round, with Lewandowski, Mbappe and Guirassy. 2 of them play on the Wednesday, on the 12th of March, which might be a slight good thing, to be fair, because most people will have an imbalance of so many Tuesday players and not many on the Wednesday, so that could be a game changer for me. But ultimately, you want to have more Tuesday players if possible, and most of us will achieve that naturally, as most of the best players and teams will play on the 11th of March. But this forward line was very disappointing in the first leg. I'm still very bullish and hopeful they can turn things around in the second leg. Lewandowski has 34 goals for Barcelona this season. Kylian Mbappe has notched 15 goals in the last 15 matches across all competitions, and Guirassy has a great record for Borussia Dortmund, so I'm backing them to turn things around. As for my bench, it looks fairly solid. I could buy David Raya to replace Kobel, but that isn't locked in, and some lineups I've seen from unreliable sources, I'll say, do have Neto starting in goal, and it wouldn't completely surprise me if that was the case, but I still think Raya will start between the sticks, and maybe Arsenal can chase the Golden Glove in the Champions League as well. But that is one possible transfer in the goalkeeper position. I think long-term, Szczesny, Courtois, Alisson and several others would be even better between the sticks. But David Raya is arguably the best option for Matchday 12 alongside Sommer, who also happens to be better for the quarterfinals and beyond. As for the rest of my bench, I've got Gabriel, Adeyemi and Schlotterbeck, so 2 Arsenal and 2 Borussia Dortmund who all play on the Wednesday, but this could change and maybe I'll tweak something else instead. keep Kobel, sell Schlotterbeck to another defender like William Saliba or the likes of Pavard or any Inter Milan defender who starts. So there's a lot of different changes I could make in every single position. So don't rule anything out, and we could get even more updates over the next couple of hours which indicate another player needs to be sold, which would add yet another dilemma and situation to deal with. With the captaincy though, I'm quite settled on Rafinha on the Tuesday, especially with the likes of Lautaro Martinez, who I was looking to bring in, not being a viable option anymore, it seems, with all of these lineups indicating he'll be on the bench. So I think Rafinha is a very safe option here, and this should be a high-scoring game, despite the fact the first leg was only 1-0. I think the red card to Pau Cubarsí completely changed the game, and we could have seen a high-scoring affair like we did in late January in that 5-4 thriller, which Barcelona ended up prevailing in, and things should open up in the second leg anyway. I'd be very surprised if it was low scoring once again. On the Wednesday, I would need a contingency plan just in case things don't go right with the original captain, and Mbappe, Guirassy and Adeyemi are the main standouts there, and I think Mbappe does take the cake right now, but he's not as appealing away from home against Atletico as he would have been for the first leg, but he did blank in that one and was very ineffective against the local rivals. But Mbappe has that match-winning quality, and he could make the difference in the second leg. And Atletico Madrid have a few injury problems and doubts, which I'll mention towards the end of this video in the injuries and fixtures section. But I think Rafinha, Lewandowski and Salah pose great options on the Tuesday for the captaincy, and on the Wednesday, I will stick with one of those three I mentioned, and Mbappe is currently the favourite. You might even point towards Dumfries as a viable Tuesday captain. I'm not completely against that. And for those that invest in Taremi, I think he's a great differential captain in place of Lautaro Martinez. So there are different ways of tackling UCL Fantasy in terms of your structure and also the captaincy. But that's the way things are landing right now with these provisional transfers of Kobel making way for David Raya, De Vrij being sold for Jules Koundé, and then Çalhanoğlu replacing the injured Florian Wirtz. That's how things are looking like right now, but there could be further changes in time for tomorrow's deadline stream. Before I provide an in-depth overview of all the injury updates on Monday morning and other things to consider like stats and form, here are the clean sheet odds for Matchday 12. Inter Milan and Arsenal are by far and away the most likely to keep a clean sheet, according to fantasyfootballpundit.com. It's a great website which I've kind of used in recent videos as well, so be sure to check them out. It's also UCL_fantasy on X. The rest of the top 5 comprise of Aston Villa, Barcelona and Borussia Dortmund. Then you've got Bayern Munich, Lille, Liverpool, Atletico Madrid, Bayer Leverkusen, Real Madrid, PSG, Club Brugge, PSV, Feyenoord and Benfica. That is the order of the clean sheet odds for the second leg of the round of 16. And in terms of goal scorer odds, it's also very interesting. Robert Lewandowski is top once more with a 54% chance of scoring against Benfica. Watkins, Rafinha, Lautaro Martinez and Kane complete the top 5. But it's worth mentioning that these stats are based on the assumption that all of these players start, and that won't be the case for some of them, especially Lautaro Martinez, with the recent reports indicating it will be Taremi and Thuram starting up front. You've also got Marcus Thuram, Yamal, Salah, Mbappe, Jonathan David, Trossard, Guirassy, Rashford, Dembele and Patrick Schick completing a very impressive top 15 list, and Bayer Leverkusen, for example, could switch their formation to a 4-4-2 and have the likes of Patrick Schick up front. That could be another differential for you in Matchday 12. In this section, you can see all of the first leg results and the upcoming fixtures for the round of 16 in the second leg. Let me know your predictions down in the comment section below, not just for this round, but also in future stages of the competition like the quarterfinals, semi-finals and a potential final. Which teams are you backing to have great UCL fantasy options and to go all the way in this season's Champions League? But let's delve into all of the fixtures in detail, step by step, starting with the early kickoff between Barcelona and Benfica. And it's worth mentioning that the Catalans are undefeated in 16 games with 13 wins and 3 draws, despite having 3 red cards in that time frame. Their match against Osasuna was postponed on Saturday following the death of their club doctor. Rafinha scored another winner against Benfica in the first leg, with Szczesny making some top saves to give the Catalans a 1-0 advantage. According to Sport, Ronald Araujo and Inigo Martinez will be the centre-back pairing against Benfica, and Cubarsí is suspended following his sending off in matchday 11. In terms of injuries, Ter Stegen is out for the rest of the season. Christensen missed the first leg due to a muscle injury, and Gavi is ill. And Hansi Flick said the following: Lewandowski is available to play tomorrow. On Saturday, he felt something during the activation session, but now he's fine. The Polish striker has 34 goals in 38 games for Barcelona this season, and in terms of those that are suspension risk, Inigo Martinez, if he gets booked, will miss the next round of the competition, and with yellow cards, they will all be wiped out after the quarterfinals. So for matchday 15 and beyond, heading into the semi-final stage, that's when the yellow cards won't be an issue anymore. Now with Benfica, they actually have some pretty decent form with 8 wins out of the last 10 matches, which includes a 3-0 triumph over Nacional. Pavlidis has scored 12 times in the last 12 games for the Eagles, who have conceded just once in the last 4 games. The Greek marksman converted a penalty off the bench on Saturday, while Amdouni and Kokchu also got on the score sheet. With injuries, Di Maria, Florentino Luis and Govia didn't feature against Barcelona, and it looks like they're also out for the second leg. Manu Silva and Bar are out for the season with ACL injuries, and suspension risks include Amdouni, Arsunis, Bar, Barreiro, Kokchu and Otamendi. But let's move on now to the next fixture, which means 8 PM UK time on the Tuesday between Feyenoord and Inter Milan, with the Italians being at home this time round. Inter Milan came back from 2-0 down against Monza to win 3-2 on Saturday. They sit top of Serie A with only 3 points separating them and third place Atalanta. Inter have lost only 5 of their 41 games this season across all competitions. With injuries, there's so much to talk about with Inter Milan as usual. Carlos Augusto made his return as a substitute, while Calhanoglu started against Monza and won man of the match. Sommer was on the bench in the last 2 games. Jose Martinez had a shaky performance between the sticks and could be dropped for matchday 12, and several sources back that up. They think Jan Sommer will start in the second leg. And on Monday morning, we got some very important news about Lautaro Martinez and De Vrij. They didn't take part in group training due to fatigue, so that could be a massive issue. While Zielinski will undergo medical exams today, the midfielder is at risk of being out for 2 months, and Inter hope that he's available by the beginning of May. DeMarco and Darmian should be available in a couple of weeks' time, and suspension risks for Inter Milan include Aslani, Barella, Bastoni, Dumfries and Benjamin Pavard. With Feyenoord though, they have so many injury problems, even more than Inter Milan or any other squad in this list. So the Dutch outfit haven't scored a goal under new manager Robin van Persie, with a 0-0 draw versus NEC to kick things off and a 2-0 loss against Inter Milan. They've won 3 matches out of the last 10 overall, and the Eredivisie gave Feyenoord the weekend off as they aim to have some of their injured players return, but it's not looking too good for them right now. They missed 15 players in the first leg against Inter Milan. Igor Paxao has now joined that lengthy injury list and will miss the game against the Italian side. Now, Van Persie stated today that Hwang and Malambo could return while Reed is back, but the likes of Lotomba, Biolo, Nagy, Nyekwup, Zerouki, Trauner and Stengs are all out, whilst Quentin Timber will miss the rest of the season. And in terms of suspension risks, that includes Mitchell and Trauner as well. The next match is PSG and Liverpool at Anfield, of course. Liverpool are 15 points clear at the top of the Premier League table after a routine win versus Southampton. Salah notched 2 penalty goals to break the all-time record for most FPL points scored within a single season, and he's only blanked in 4 games across all competitions in 2025, which includes the first leg against Paris Saint-Germain. With injuries, Bradley and Gomez are out, but Gakpo has taken part in full team training today after Arne Slot's comments about his issue not being long-term only several days ago, and suspension risks include Elliott, Kanate, McAllister, Robertson and Van Dijk. Whilst with PSG, they were undefeated since late November, but that came to an end against Liverpool. They responded with a 4-1 away win versus Rennes to make it 10 consecutive away wins at this moment in time. Only 3 of the players who started in the first leg kept their spot on Saturday, and despite blanking in the last 2 Champions League games, Dembele scored another brace off the bench to mark his 20th goal in 2025, more than any other player across world football, and the Parisians have no injuries to report, and Marquinhos and Fabian Ruiz will miss the next match if they are booked. But let's now move on to another heavyweight clash between Bayern Munich and Bayer Leverkusen. So in the case of the home side, Leverkusen have lost consecutive games for the first time in almost 2 years. Their 2-0 defeat at home to Werder Bremen also means they have failed to score in back-to-back matches, and it goes from bad to worse as Florian Wirtz could miss the rest of the season. That was according to Kicker, but Leverkusen themselves posted an official statement saying that Wirtz will be out for for the next couple of weeks, so hopefully he returns very soon. In terms of other injuries, Andrik missed the first leg due to illness, but should be available for matchday 12. Terrier and Belosian will not play again this season, and the likes of Andrik, Frimpong, Garcia, Tar, Wirtz and Xhaka will all miss the next game if they're yellow carded. And with Bayern Munich, they lost 3-2 at home to Bochum. Guerrero scored both goals, yet they maintained their 8-point lead at the top of the Bundesliga table, and the Bavarians are showing good form overall, with 13 wins, 2 draws and 2 losses out of the last 17 matches. Ever since he joined Bayern Munich, Kane has 75 goals in 80 games, more than any other player in world football, and Manuel Neuer picked up a muscle strain to his right calf after celebrating Bayern Munich's second goal against Bayer Leverkusen. The 21-year-old Urbig is the replacement in goal as things stand. Peretz remains out with a kidney problem, while Buchmann has a shoulder injury, and Pavlovic is suffering from a massive viral infection. He will miss the next couple of matches and also the international break for Germany against Italy as well. So that's another doubt there for Bayern Munich, and in that case, of course, he is ruled out definitively. And Gnabry, Goretzka and Sane will all miss the next game if they're booked. Now, the other game we have to talk about, we're now onto the Wednesday here, and an early kickoff between Lille and Borussia Dortmund. Lille defeated Montpellier 1-0, courtesy of a Jonathan David winner, and that's 5 wins out of the last 10 matches. They've only lost 4 times in the last 32 matches across all competitions, with 16 victories there, and Jonathan David has 5 goals and 4 assists in that spell of 10 matches, which is very impressive. Thiago Santos is unavailable with an ACL injury, while Zagrova is a doubt. Sarawi has a hip problem, and David and Meunier are all suspension risks as well. Whilst with Borussia Dortmund, they lost 1-0 at home to Augsburg, so their kind of short turnaround didn't last very long, and they remain 10th in the Bundesliga out of 18 possible teams. They have 5 wins from the last 10 matches, and Guirassy has 9 goals and 1 assist in that period, but he has blanked in 5 of those games. His overall record remains very impressive though, with 54 goals in 64 club appearances since the beginning of last season. With injuries, shortly after their 1-1 draw against Lille, Borussia Dortmund confirmed that Daniel Svensson suffered an inner ligament injury. He will not be available until early April. Mane is still flagged, while Mecha is ruled out with a knee injury. Bayer, Kuto, Gross, Ryerson and Sabitzer will all miss the next game if they're booked. But let's now move on to another matchup between Aston Villa and Club Brugge, and the Villains have won 3 consecutive games with a 1-0 win versus Brentford away from home on Saturday. Marco Asensio has 4 goals in the last 5 matches, scoring a penalty as a substitute versus Club Brugge, but he missed the game against Brentford. The same goes for Emi Martinez, who you can see on screen. Watkins scored the winner against his former club, and Rodgers had yet another disallowed goal in the Premier League. With injuries, Barkley and Onana are unavailable, but Pau Torres returned from injury in matchday 11. He was on the bench there. Marlon is ill, but that's not too relevant here because he isn't registered in the Champions League squad. And those that could miss the next match if booked include Dean, Disasi, Kamara, and Marcus Rashford. So that's a lot to talk about there. The same goes for Club Brugge, who have won 4 out of the last 10 games across all competitions. Their recent match was a 3-1 win on the road versus Cercle Bruges, and there was a bit of controversy there with a Club Brugge player trying to plant a flag of their club on opposition soil. Does he think he's Neil Armstrong? Who knows at this point. But Jukla scored a brace to make it 6 goals and 1 assist in the last 7 matches. Club Brugge are second in the Belgian league, 9 points behind Genk. They have only failed to score in 1 of the last 37 contests. That came against Juventus back in matchday 7. There are no injuries to report at this moment in time, and Onyedika, Seys, Skoras, Zolis and Veltlerson, they could all be suspended if they pick up 1 more booking there. So that is all there is for Club Brugge and Aston Villa. Let's now move on to Arsenal versus PSV, and Arsenal have 6 wins out of the last 10 matches, but are winless in 3 Premier League games. They drew 1-1 versus Man United at Old Trafford with the same issues of chance creation and a lack of quality up front against the low block. The Gunners have looked stronger in Europe, with the 7-1 win against PSV being their biggest ever away win in the Champions League. They finished 3rd in the group stages and only 1 goal conceded throughout the entire tournament from open play. Martinelli was brought on as a substitute on Sunday and had a poor cameo after missing over a month of football, and Bukayo Saka could be available by the end of this month, whilst Havertz, Jesus and Tomiyasu are out for the season. The likes of Martinelli, Sterling and Timber will miss the next match if booked. With PSV, despite winning 2-1 on Saturday, they only have 3 wins out of the last 10 matches. They lost consecutive games against go-ahead Eagles, and their 7-1 loss against Arsenal was their joint worst defeat in the club's history. Pepe is out for the season, while Badrak Tarovic is doubtful. Tillman and Dest are still unavailable, but that could change in the coming days. And in terms of suspension risks, you've got De Jong, Mauro Jr., Karsdorp, Malacia, and Veerman as well. But now it's time to discuss the Madrid derby, and Atletico Madrid are at home this time round. They only had one defeat in 26 games before losing consecutive matches against Real Madrid and Getafe. They slipped down to third in La Liga, and one of their substitutes, Ángel Correa, was sent off, while Alvarez has 6 goals and 3 assists in the last 10 matches. He also scored a stunner in the first leg. Azpilicueta returned to the squad in their 2-1 loss against Getafe, and just in this morning, Rodrigo de Paul and Lenglet are not injured, but they remain doubtful until the final hours before the Madrid derby. If fully fit, both are expected to start, and de Paul is training normally with the starters in the gym following his knock yesterday, while Lenglet is training on the sidelines with Koke, but he is not ruled out just yet. Koke still has an issue with his lower leg, and the likes of Correa and Jimenez will miss the next game if booked. And finally, Los Merengues, the Champions League holders, Real Madrid, they rose to second in La Liga after a 2-1 win. Vinicius and Mbappe scored the goals, with the Frenchman having 7 goals and 1 assist in the last 10 matches, and Real Madrid have won 7 of those games and only trail Barcelona on goal difference in La Liga, with 1 extra game being played. Courtois and Rudiger were given a rest as they dealt with minor injuries, and Valverde was a substitute against Rayo Vallecano. Reports on Monday morning indicate that Courtois, Valverde and Rudiger are all available, and the club also reported that Vinicius has a minor injury to a toe on his right foot. Bellingham has suffered a minor blow to his right thigh, and Rodrigo has suffered a blow to the metatarsal of his left hand, although it isn't serious. Ancelotti believes that all of them should start the derby. Nothing has changed with the previously reported injuries. Ceballos could be out for months with a hamstring issue, and Vallejo still has a muscle problem. Meanwhile, Carvajal and Militao won't return until next season with ACL injuries, and the suspension risks to look out for include Camavinga, Endrick, Eder Militao, Modric, Rudiger, and Tchouaméni. It's worth emphasizing that in this section, I'm going to showcase some alternative transfers, some of which were discussed earlier in this video, but in terms of goalkeepers, apart from David Raya, it doesn't make much sense for me to buy a new one between the sticks, even if Kobel doesn't look great this week against Lille, because most of my favorite options, not just for the long term, but also for Matchday 12, play on the Tuesday, and that means a clash with Alisson Becker. So it's really just David Raya or nothing as my Wednesday goalkeeper to replace Kobel here. And with my defenders, I'm looking at Pavard, if he's in that predicted lineup by Sky Sports Italia, to start for Inter Milan. Upamecano is my favourite Bayern Munich defender right now, and Kim Min-jae is still decent, but that would only be if Grimaldo, for example, suffers a problem. And Jules Koundé, as you saw before, he is kind of one of my new transfers that I'm looking at, but otherwise, I might just end up keeping Schlotterbeck, but I'm going to try to avoid a quadruple up in Borussia Dortmund. I think trimming it down to 2 or 3 is the sweet spot, and you could even argue having 1 or none at all is the best case solution, because Lille are in a great position to advance to the next round. But I think one of Schlotterbeck or Kobel will go for me, and in the midfield, Martin Odegaard is one of the key alternatives to Çalhanoğlu to replace the injured Florian Wirtz, and the likes of Musiala and Morgan Rogers, even Asensio, are all coming into my thinking. The same goes for Jude Bellingham, who is now back from suspension after missing Matchday 11 and the last couple of games in La Liga. And up front, Harry Kane is a standout replacement. If I just want to focus on Matchday 12 only, another one I'm looking at would be Taremi, and I do have that Inter Milan spot available. You can pick 4 players from the same club. This will then increase in future rounds of the competition, and by that stage, Inter Milan will likely face Bayern Munich, and if not, it will be Bayer Leverkusen, so either opposition will be very tough. But I think Inter Milan have a great chance of reaching the semi-finals, and Taremi is really just that 1 week punt. I don't like him long term, and with my wild card in the back pocket, it does allow me to be very aggressive. After watching all of my UCL Fantasy videos and tomorrow's deadline stream, you'll be in a great position to tackle Matchday 12 head-on, and you'll be on top of every single injury update, team news, suspensions, best form, stats, and you can identify the best players in each position with your normal transfers, the wildcard, or the limitless team. So everything you need to know has been covered across all of my content, and I'll be answering hundreds of your questions in tomorrow's deadline stream. Thank you very much for watching this video and listening to this podcast. If you enjoyed it or found it insightful, then like the video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss a single upload or live stream, both for UCL Fantasy and FPL. There are many links in the description below. That includes my X, Instagram, and Blue Sky, Dylan RCM. There's also my Discord server, UCL Fantasy League, and Spotify. So there are many different ways to contact me and the great community we have. So thank you very much for being a part of it. I'll see you tomorrow for that deadline stream in UCL Fantasy. And don't forget, for FPL, there's a lot more content headed your way with the best free hit team, a wildcard squad, my own team selection, and another deadline stream on Saturday.